David Thompson lived a life many only dreamed of. Nestled in a charming, ivy-covered home on the outskirts of a picturesque town, he shared his days with his beloved wife, Emily, and their spirited young son, Liam. The house, with its warm, welcoming glow and the scent of blooming roses from Emily's meticulously tended garden, was more than just a structure. It was a home filled with love, laughter, and the warmth of family. David and Emily had met during their college years. He was studying architecture, fascinated by the way structures could shape lives, while she was pursuing a degree in education, driven by her passion for nurturing young minds. Their love story began on a crisp autumn afternoon when they were paired for a class project. Emily's vibrant personality and infectious laughter captivated David from the start. She had a way of making even the most mundane moments feel magical, and soon, their partnership blossomed into a deep, enduring love. After graduation, they married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. They settled into a life that felt like a dream come true. David's career as an architect flourished, and he took pride in designing homes that were as beautiful and functional as his own. Emily, on the other hand, found joy in teaching, where she was adored by her students and respected by her colleagues. Her classroom was a sanctuary of creativity, kindness, and encouragement. Liam was the light of their lives, a sweet and curious child who seemed to inherit the best traits of both his parents. He had Emily's bright smile and David's thoughtful eyes, and from the moment he was born, he filled their home with even more love. Emily's days were spent with Liam, teaching him about the world around them, baking cookies together, and going on little adventures in the nearby woods. David would often come home from work to find the two of them engrossed in some new project, whether it was building a fort in the living room or planting flowers in the garden. The Thompson household was a place of joy and contentment. Weekends were filled with family outings to the beach, where they would build sandcastles and collect seashells. Evenings were spent cuddled up on the couch, watching movies or reading stories. Every holiday was celebrated with enthusiasm, from the twinkling lights of Christmas to the vibrant colors of Easter. Life was in every sense perfect. David often found himself marveling at the life they had built together. He would watch Emily as she danced around the kitchen, her laughter ringing through the house, and feel a deep sense of gratitude for the love they shared. He knew he was lucky, so incredibly lucky, to have a wife like Emily and a son like Liam. It was a life that felt like a fairy tale, one that David never wanted to end. But life, as it often does, had other plans. One day, as the first signs of autumn began to touch the leaves with gold, Emily started to feel unwell. At first, it was nothing more than a bit of fatigue and the occasional headache, small annoyances that she brushed off as the effects of a busy life. But as the weeks went by, the symptoms grew worse. Emily, always so full of energy and life, began to struggle with simple tasks. She would come home from school utterly exhausted, her face pale and drawn. David noticed the changes, of course. He urged her to see a doctor, but Emily, ever the optimist, insisted it was nothing serious. She attributed her fatigue to the demands of teaching and taking care of a young child. But deep down, David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had always known Emily as someone who could handle anything life threw at her with grace and strength. To see her struggle was unsettling, and it filled him with a quiet dread. Finally, after much persuasion, Emily agreed to see a doctor. The days that followed were a blur of hospital visits, tests, and waiting. Endless waiting for results that would change their lives forever. When the diagnosis finally came, it was like a punch to the gut. Emily had cancer. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud, suffocating and oppressive. David couldn't believe it. How could someone as vibrant and full of life as Emily be stricken with something so cruel? It seemed impossible, unfair. The doctors talked about treatment options, about fighting the disease with everything they had, but all David could think about was how fragile life suddenly felt. Emily, ever the brave soul, faced the diagnosis with a courage that left David in awe. She decided to fight the cancer with everything she had, not just for herself, but for David and Liam. She underwent surgery, followed by rounds of chemotherapy that left her weak and sick. David was by her side every step of the way, holding her hand through the pain, whispering words of encouragement, and trying to keep a brave face for Liam, who was too young to fully understand what was happening. Their once perfect life was now a battle against time, against fear, against the inevitable. The house that had been filled with laughter and love now echoed with the quiet hum of medical equipment and the muffled sobs of a family trying to hold on to hope. The roles they once played so naturally were now strained. David became not just a husband, but a caregiver, a nurse, and a constant source of strength for both Emily and Liam. He juggled work with Emily's appointments, managing the household, and ensuring that Liam's life remained as normal as possible. Through it all, David marveled at Emily's strength. Even in the midst of her pain, she remained focused on Liam, making sure he never felt the full weight of her illness. She would smile through her tears, read him bedtime stories, and kiss him goodnight, as if nothing had changed. But David knew better. He could see the toll the cancer was taking on her, could feel her slipping away, little by little, with each passing day. As the months wore on, it became clear that Emily's time was running out. The treatments, which had initially offered a glimmer of hope, began to fail. The cancer spread, and with it came a level of pain and exhaustion that no one should have to endure. The vibrant woman David had fallen in love with was fading before his eyes, her once bright spirit dimmed by the relentless advance of the disease. One cold winter night, as snowflakes gently drifted down outside the window, Emily called David to her bedside. Her voice, once strong and full of life, was now just a whisper, but it still held the strength that had always been at her core. "David," she said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart ache, "I need you to promise me something." David, sitting by her side, holding her frail hand in his, nodded, though the tears in his eyes made it hard to see. "Anything, Emily. Anything you need." Emily took a deep breath, summoning the last of her strength. "Promise me that you'll live a happy life with Liam. Don't let this sorrow consume you. I know it's going to be hard, but you have to find a way to be happy again. Liam needs you, and I want you to find someone new, someone who can love you and Liam like I have. Promise me you'll find love again and continue living your life." David's throat tightened, and he could barely speak through the tears that choked him. "Emily, I don't know if I could do that. I can't imagine my life without you." Emily's eyes softened, and she gave him a small, sad smile. "I know, David, but you have to try. For Liam, and for me. You have so much love to give, and I don't want you to waste it on grief. You deserve to be happy. Promise me you'll try." David's heart shattered as he realized the truth of her words. He had to be strong, not just for himself, but for Liam, and for the memory of the woman who had brought so much light into their lives. He leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I promise, Emily. I'll try. I'll do my best." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of peace, of acceptance. She had fought her battle, and now she was ready to let go, knowing that she had done everything she could to ensure the happiness of the two people she loved most in the world. With a final, loving smile, Emily closed her eyes and drifted into a peaceful sleep, leaving David to face a world without her. In the days and weeks following Emily's death, David felt as though he was walking through a nightmare. The world continued to spin, the sun rose and set, but everything felt wrong, empty. The house that had once been so full of life now felt like a tomb, each room a painful reminder of the love they had lost. David struggled to maintain a sense of normalcy for Liam's sake, but it was an uphill battle. Every morning he would wake up, half expecting to see Emily beside him, only to be met with the cold reality of her absence. Her side of the bed remained untouched, her clothes still hanging in the closet, her scent lingering in the air, a cruel reminder of what had been. Liam, too, was lost in his grief. The once lively, curious boy had become quiet and withdrawn, his bright eyes now filled with a sadness far beyond his years. He would often ask David when Mommy was coming back, and each time, David's heart would break all over again as he explained that mommy was in heaven now, watching over them. David did his best to keep things together, but it was hard. The simple tasks that he had once taken for granted, making breakfast, getting Liam ready for school, cleaning the house, now seemed monumental. There were days when the weight of his grief was so heavy that he could barely get out of bed. But every time he looked at Liam, he found the strength to keep going. He had promised Emily that he would try to live a happy life. And while happiness felt impossible in those early days, he knew he had to at least survive for Liam. The community rallied around them, offering their support in whatever ways they could. Neighbors would drop by with meals, friends would take Liam for playdates, and David's family would visit often to lend a hand. But despite their best efforts, there was a void that nothing and no one could fill. David returned to work after a few months, throwing himself into his projects as a way to distract from the pain. He designed homes that would be filled with love and laughter, homes that would become the heart of other families' lives, even as his own heart felt shattered beyond repair. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on work, thoughts of Emily were never far from his mind. She had been his partner in every sense, and without her, he felt incomplete, as though a part of him had died with her. Nights were the hardest. Once Liam was asleep, David would find himself alone with his thoughts, the silence of the house almost unbearable. He would sit in the dark, staring at the photo of Emily that sat on his bedside table, her smiling face a painful contrast to the emptiness he felt inside. Sometimes he would talk to her, telling her about his day, about Liam, about how much he missed her. Other times, he would just sit in silence, letting the tears come, letting the pain wash over him. He knew he couldn't go on like this forever. He knew he had to find a way to move forward, to keep the promise he had made to Emily. But in those early months, it felt impossible. How could he ever be happy again when the love of his life was gone? As the seasons changed and time marched forward, David slowly began to find a new rhythm, though it was nothing like the life he had once known. The pain of losing Emily was still there, ever present, but he was learning to live with it, to carry it with him as he navigated this new reality. He threw himself into fatherhood, determined to be the best parent he could be for Liam. Liam was his anchor, the one thing that kept him from completely losing himself in his grief. The boy needed him, and David was determined not to let him down. He tried to create a sense of normalcy for Liam, keeping up with their daily routines, making sure he was still engaged in activities he enjoyed. But it wasn't easy. Every time he looked at Liam, he saw Emily, her smile, her eyes, her spirit, and it was a bittersweet reminder of what they had lost. David started attending a support group for widowers, something he had resisted at first, not wanting to share his pain with strangers. But as time went on, he realized he needed to talk to people who understood what he was going through, who had walked the same path of loss and survival. The group became a lifeline for him, a place where he could express his grief without judgment, where he could find solace in the shared experiences of others. At home, David and Liam developed new routines. They would visit Emily's grave every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers and spending a few moments in quiet reflection. It was their way of keeping her memory alive, of ensuring that she remained a part of their lives, even though she was no longer physically with them. David would tell Liam stories about Emily, about the adventures they had before he was born, and about the deep love she had for him. It was important to David that Liam never forget how much his mother had adored him. But despite his best efforts, David couldn't help but feel the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. The house was too quiet, too empty without Emily's presence. He missed the sound of her laughter, the way she would hum to herself as she cooked dinner, the warmth of her touch. There were nights when he would wake up, reaching out for her in the darkness, only to be met with the cold emptiness of her side of the bed. He thought often of the promise he had made to Emily, the promise to find happiness again, to find someone new to love. But the idea of moving on felt like a betrayal, as though he were somehow dishonoring her memory. How could he even think about loving someone else when his heart still belonged to her? And yet, he knew that this was what Emily had wanted for him, what she had asked him to do. She had loved him enough to want him to be happy, even if it meant finding that happiness with someone else. The struggle between his grief and his desire to honor Emily's wish tore at him daily. But through it all, one thing remained constant: his love for Liam. Every time he looked at his son, he was reminded of the life he and Emily had built together, the love they had shared, and the future they had envisioned for their family. Liam was a living testament to that love, a bright spot in the darkness that had enveloped their lives. And so, David continued to move forward, one day at a time, holding on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to keep his promise to Emily, to live, to love, and to find happiness again. Months had passed since Emily's death, and though the pain was still fresh, David had learned to navigate his grief. Each day was a new struggle, but the presence of his son, Liam, provided him with the strength he needed to keep going. They had developed a quiet routine, one that offered some comfort amidst the uncertainty. Yet, even as he tried to move forward, there was an emptiness in David's life that he couldn't ignore. One rainy afternoon, as David hurriedly picked Liam up from school, he decided to stop by a small cafe in town to grab a quick coffee. It was one of those places that Emily had loved, cozy, with warm lighting and the rich aroma of freshly baked goods. David hadn't been there since she passed, but today, he felt a strange pull to revisit it. As he and Liam entered the cafe, the bell above the door chimed softly. The interior was just as he remembered it, filled with the chatter of people and the clinking of cups. David ordered their drinks and a small snack for Liam, and they settled at a table near the window, watching the rain pour down outside. It was then that David noticed her, a woman sitting alone at a table across the room, engrossed in a book. She had long, dark hair that cascaded over her shoulders, and there was a quiet grace about her that caught David's attention. She seemed familiar somehow, though David couldn't quite place her. As they sat there, Liam, ever the curious child, noticed the woman as well. "Daddy, that lady is reading the same book Mommy used to read," he whispered, pointing at her with wide eyes. David glanced over at the book in her hands, To Kill a Mockingbird. It had been one of Emily's favorites. The memory stirred something in David, a bittersweet reminder of the woman he had lost. Just then, the woman looked up and their eyes met. For a moment, David froze, unsure of what to do. But then, she smiled, a warm, inviting smile that made something in David's chest loosen. There was something in her gaze that reminded him of Emily, though he knew it was impossible. Still, the connection he felt in that brief moment was undeniable. Before he could second-guess himself, the woman stood up and approached their table. "Hi," she said softly, her voice as warm as her smile. "I couldn't help but notice your son's interest in my book. It's a favorite of mine. Was it his mother's favorite too?" David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, it was my wife. She passed away a few months ago." The woman's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of understanding. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, her voice gentle. "My name's Grace. I'm new to town. Just moved here a few weeks ago." "David," he replied, offering her a small, tentative smile. "And this is Liam." Grace turned to Liam, her smile brightening. "It's nice to meet you, Liam. You have excellent taste in books." Liam beamed at the compliment, his earlier shyness melting away. "Mommy used to read it to me. She said it was important." Grace nodded. "Your mommy was very right. It's a very important book." As they continued talking, David found himself feeling at ease in Grace's presence. She was kind and thoughtful, and there was a softness to her that reminded him of Emily. But there was also something distinctly different about her, something that intrigued him. When they finally left the cafe, Grace gave David her number, suggesting they meet up again sometime. "I'd love to get to know you both better," she said, her eyes warm with sincerity. David took the number, unsure of what the future held, but feeling a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Over the next few weeks, David and Grace began to see more of each other. Their initial meetings were casual, a cup of coffee here, a walk in the park there, but each time they met, the connection between them grew stronger. Grace had a way of making David feel comfortable, even when the pain of his past threatened to overwhelm him. She never pushed him to talk about Emily or his grief, but was always there to listen when he needed to. Liam, too, took an instant liking to Grace. Whenever she was around, he seemed happier, more like his old self. He would chatter away to her about his day, his toys, and his memories of his mother, and Grace listened with the same patience and attentiveness that Emily had once shown. It warmed David's heart to see his son forming a bond with someone new, someone who seemed to genuinely care for him. One sunny afternoon, David, Liam, and Grace decided to spend the day at a local fair. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. It was the first time in months that David had felt truly relaxed, as though the weight of his grief had lifted just a little. As they walked through the fairgrounds, Liam spotted a carousel and tugged at David's hand. "Daddy, can we go on the carousel?" "Please." David smiled at his son's excitement. "Of course, buddy. Let's go." Grace followed them to the carousel, and together they watched as Liam chose his horse, a gleaming white one with a flowing mane. As the carousel started to move, Liam's laughter filled the air, a sound that David had missed more than he realized. Grace turned to David, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the day. "He's a wonderful child, David. You've done such a great job raising him." David felt a lump in his throat at her words. "I'm just doing my best. It hasn't been easy." Grace placed a hand on his arm, offering comfort. "I know, but you're doing an amazing job, David. I can see how much you love him, and he loves you too." They watched as the carousel spun around, the colors blending together in a dizzying display. For the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of peace, as though the pieces of his shattered life were slowly coming back together. After the fair, they returned to David's home for dinner. It was a simple meal, pasta and salad, but the atmosphere was filled with warmth and laughter. Grace had a way of making everything feel special, even the most ordinary moments. As they sat at the table, Liam turned to Grace with a serious expression. "Do you like my daddy?" he asked, his innocent eyes wide with curiosity. Grace chuckled, caught off guard by the question. "Yes, Liam, I like your daddy very much." Liam nodded, satisfied with her answer. "Good, 'cause I like you too." David's heart swelled with emotion as he watched the exchange. He knew then that Grace had become more than just a friend to them. She was someone who had brought light back into their lives, someone who had helped them start to heal. Later that night, after Grace had left and Liam was asleep, David sat alone in the living room, thinking about how much had changed since he first met Grace. There was still a part of him that was afraid to move on, afraid of what it would mean to love someone new. But he couldn't deny the feelings that were growing inside him, feelings that he hadn't expected to find again. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, her final words to him, a plea to find happiness, to live his life, and to love again. David knew that if Emily were here, she would want him to take this chance, to embrace the possibility of a future with Grace. And so, he made a decision. He would allow himself to open up to Grace, to let her in and see where their connection could lead. It was what Emily would have wanted, and it was what David needed to do for himself and for Liam. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between David and Grace deepened. They spent more and more time together, sharing stories, dreams, and even their fears. Grace was patient and understanding, never pressuring David, but always being there when he needed her. She had a way of making him feel alive again, of helping him see the world in color instead of the shades of gray that had dominated his life since Emily's death. Liam, too, continued to thrive in Grace's presence. He would often ask when she was coming over, his face lighting up whenever she arrived. The bond between them was undeniable, and it filled David with a mixture of happiness and guilt. He was grateful that Liam had found someone to care for him so deeply, but part of him still felt as though he was betraying Emily by allowing someone else into their lives. One evening, as they sat together on David's porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, Grace turned to him with a soft smile. "David, I know this isn't easy for you. I know how much you loved Emily, and I would never try to replace her. But I care about you and Liam more than I can put into words. I want to be there for both of you, in whatever way you need." David looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and love reflected there. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Grace, you've done more for us than I could have ever asked for. You've brought joy back into our lives, and for that, I'm so grateful. I never thought I could feel this way again, but with you it feels right." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. It was a tender, tentative kiss, filled with all the emotions they had been holding back. When they pulled away, they both knew that something had shifted between them. This was no longer just a friendship. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that could change both of their lives forever. That night, as David lay in bed, he thought about the kiss, about Grace, and about what the future might hold. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges and moments of doubt, but for the first time since Emily's death, he felt hopeful about what lay ahead. As the relationship between David and Grace blossomed, they began to talk about the future. It was a conversation that had once seemed impossible to David, but now, it was one he found himself looking forward to. They talked about their dreams, their hopes, and what it might look like to build a life together. Grace was open and honest about her feelings, telling David that she wanted to be a part of his and Liam's lives, not just as a friend, but as something more. David, in turn, shared his fears of moving on, of forgetting Emily, of what it would mean to love someone new. But Grace was patient, reassuring him that loving her didn't mean he had to stop loving Emily. There was room in his heart for both. One weekend, Grace suggested they take a trip to the beach, a place where David, Emily, and Liam had often gone when Emily was still alive. It was a place filled with memories, both happy and painful, but David agreed, knowing that this was a step he needed to take. As they walked along the shore, the waves crashing gently against the sand, David felt a sense of peace wash over him. The sun was warm on his skin, the breeze soft and soothing. He watched as Liam ran ahead, laughing as he chased the seagulls, and he couldn't help but smile. Grace walked beside him, her hand slipping into his. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Thank you for sharing this place with me." David squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you for being here with us. It means a lot." They spent the day at the beach, building sandcastles, playing in the water, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was a day filled with laughter and love, a day that reminded David of the happiness he had once known and the happiness he could know again. That evening, as they sat around a bonfire, roasting marshmallows, Liam curled up in Grace's lap, his eyes heavy with sleep. David watched them, his heart swelling with emotion. This was what Emily had wanted for them, a chance to find happiness, to live their lives, and to love again. With Liam asleep in Grace's arms, David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. His heart pounded in his chest as he opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring. Grace's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at the ring, then back at David. "Grace," David began, his voice trembling with emotion. "I never thought I would be able to love someone again after losing Emily. But you've shown me that it's possible, that life can go on, and that love can find us again. You've become such an important part of my life, of Liam's life, and I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in Grace's eyes as she looked at the man she had come to love so deeply. She had never expected this, had never imagined that she would find such a connection with someone who had been through so much. But here they were, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, David," Grace whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." David's heart soared as he slipped the ring on her finger, his hands shaking with joy. They kissed, a kiss filled with all the love and hope they had found in each other. It was a moment of pure happiness, a moment that marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The months following David's proposal were filled with excitement and preparation. Grace moved into David's home, and together they began to build a life that was uniquely theirs. It was a blending of their pasts and their futures, a life that honored Emily's memory while also embracing the love that had grown between them. Liam was overjoyed by the news of the upcoming wedding. He had grown to love Grace as much as his father did, and the idea of her becoming a permanent part of their lives made him happier than he had been in a long time. He often talked about the wedding, asking questions about the ceremony, the cake, and what role he would play. David and Grace decided to make him the ring bearer, a role that he took very seriously. The wedding itself was a small, intimate affair held in the garden of David's family home. It was a place filled with memories, a place where Emily had once walked, and where David had spent countless hours with her. It felt right to get married there, to start this new chapter in a place that held so much significance. On the day of the wedding, the garden was filled with flowers, roses, daisies, and Emily's favorite lilies. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm, golden glow over the scene. David stood at the altar, his heart racing with anticipation as he watched Grace walk towards him, her smile radiant and her eyes filled with love. As they exchanged vows, David felt a sense of peace and contentment that he hadn't known in years. He knew that Emily was with them in spirit, that she was watching over them and blessing this union. He had kept his promise to her. He had found happiness again, and he had found someone to love and to share his life with. When the ceremony was over and they were officially husband and wife, David pulled Grace into a tender embrace, feeling the warmth of her love envelop him. Liam ran up to them, wrapping his arms around both of them, and they stood there a new family, bound by love and by the promise of a future filled with joy. The reception was filled with laughter and celebration. Friends and family gathered to toast the happy couple, to dance, and to share in the joy of the day. David couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop looking at Grace and marveling at how far they had come. She was his partner, his confidant, and the woman who had helped him find his way back to happiness. As the night wore on, David and Grace slipped away from the crowd, taking a quiet moment for themselves. They stood under the stars, the night sky a blanket of twinkling lights above them. "I love you, Grace," David whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for giving me another chance at happiness, for loving me and Liam, and for being the incredible woman that you are." Grace smiled up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you too, David, more than I can ever express. You and Liam have given me so much, and I'm so grateful to have found you both." They kissed then, a kiss that sealed their love and their commitment to each other. It was a kiss that held the promise of a lifetime of happiness, a lifetime of love, and a lifetime of shared memories. And as they stood there, under the stars, David knew that they were going to be okay. They had found their way through the darkness, and now they were stepping into the light together. Their story was one of love, loss, and the power of second chances. It was a story that had brought them to this moment, a moment of pure joy and contentment. And as they looked ahead to their future, David knew that they would face whatever came their way with strength, with love, and with the knowledge that they were not alone. They had each other, and that was all they needed. Hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like it and subscribe to our channel. Your participation is essential so that we can continue to bring you more incredible stories. Share it with your friends to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.